Hey guys, tonight we are leaving behind the familiar anxieties of modern dating, the swiping, the ghosting, the deciphering of cryptic texts, and we are journeying back to a time when romance was governed by a whole different set of bewildering rules. Imagine trying to win someone's heart, but your main tools are not witty banter and a well-chosen profile picture, but questionable love potions, a secret language of flowers, and the very real risk of being diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. The simple truth is, if you approached medieval romance with modern sensibilities, you probably wouldn't survive the first date, let alone the courtship. But that's what makes it so wonderfully boring and sleepy to explore. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and post your location and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey into the world of medieval romance begins not with a flirtatious smile or a shared glance, but with a trip to the doctor. You see, you have a problem. There is a certain person you cannot get out of your head. The very thought of them makes your heart race and your palms sweat. You can't eat. You can't sleep. You spend your days in a fog of daydreaming and your nights tossing and turning. To us, this sounds like a pretty standard, if intense, crush. To a medieval physician, however, these are the clear and alarming symptoms of a serious medical condition. You find yourself in a scholar's room, the air thick with the smell of old parchment and dried herbs. The physician, a man in dark robes with a serious expression, does not ask about your feelings. He is not interested in your hopes or your dreams for this relationship. He is a man of science, and he is concerned with the physical manifestations of your ailment. He asks if you have a fever. He checks the color of your tongue. He takes your pulse, his brow furrowed in concentration. He might ask for a flask of your urine to inspect its color and clarity. After a thorough examination, he leans back and gives you the grave diagnosis. You are suffering from amor-heroes, or heroic love. More commonly, it's known simply as lovesickness. This is the first and most fundamental piece of bizarre advice from the era. Love is not an emotion, it is a disease. This wasn't just a poetic metaphor. It was a mainstream historical fact, a recognized and well-documented pathology discussed in actual medical textbooks right alongside gout and plague. Learned physicians from across Europe and the Middle East wrote lengthy treatises on its causes, symptoms, and cures. The scientific explanation for your condition was rooted in the prevailing theory of the four humors. Your body, they believed, was a delicate balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Intense, unfulfilled love, particularly the obsessive kind, was thought to be a powerful force that could throw this entire system into chaos. The image of your beloved, it was theorized, had become physically imprinted on the frontal lobes of your brain, in the part that governed imagination. This constant, looping image generated an intense heat, a kind of internal fire that began to burn away your body's natural moisture. This internal heat would corrupt your humors, leading to an excess of black bile, which in turn caused the profound melancholy and obsessive thoughts you are experiencing. You are, quite literally, being consumed from the inside out by your own affection. The symptoms were well established: a low-grade fever, a weak and erratic pulse, hollow and tearful eyes, insomnia, and a complete loss of appetite. Sufferers were described as pale, sighing, and prone to long periods of silent, obsessive brooding, punctuated by fits of weeping. It was a condition that, if left untreated, could genuinely lead to madness or even death. A particularly clever physician might employ a quirky diagnostic trick to confirm your case. While holding your wrist and feeling your pulse, he would begin to speak of various topics, or perhaps list the names of various eligible people in the town. If your pulse remained steady until he mentioned the name of your beloved, at which point it suddenly began to race and flutter, well, the diagnosis was confirmed beyond a doubt. Your own body had betrayed your secret. So, what were the cures for this terrible affliction? The prescribed treatments ranged from the gentle and sensible to the truly bizarre. The first line of defense was usually distraction. The physician would advise you to seek out new company, to take up a stimulating new activity, or to travel, if you could afford it. The idea was to dislodge the obsessive image of your beloved from your mind by replacing it with new sights and sounds. You would be prescribed listening to soft, pleasant music, taking warm baths scented with violets, and spending time in beautiful gardens, smelling fragrant flowers. You'd also be given strict dietary advice. To counteract the heat of love, you must consume moistening foods, lettuce, cucumber, melons, and pears. You were to avoid all heating foods, like spicy peppers, red meat, and especially wine, which was thought to inflame the passions terribly. But what if these gentle cures didn't work? What if your obsession lingered? This is when the treatments took a more extreme turn. A very common prescription for persistent lovesickness was bloodletting. The barber surgeon would be called to open a vein in your arm and drain a quantity of your hot blood to cool your passions and restore balance. If that seems extreme, another prescribed cure was a kind of early aversion therapy. The physician might instruct your family to find an old, unattractive person to follow you around, constantly insulting you and, more importantly, detailing every possible physical flaw of the person you adored. The shock of this ugliness and negativity was supposed to jolt you out of your fantasy. Historians still argue whether lovesickness was a genuine, widespread psychological phenomenon amplified by the romantic literature of the time, or if it was primarily a literary trope that occasionally required a medical label. Was it a real epidemic of broken hearts, or just a dramatic way to describe the very real pain of unrequited love? Whatever the case, the medical community took it seriously. So seriously, in fact, that one of the most commonly prescribed cures, if all else failed, was for the sufferer to simply fulfill their desires. If a young man was dying of love for a young woman, some medical texts advised that the best and final cure was for the two to be united. It was a strange medical model where the disease, in some cases, was also its own cure. Your journey into medieval romance has begun with a diagnosis, a diet plan, and the potential for a rather unpleasant session with a hired curmudgeon. Now that you have your official diagnosis of lovesickness, let's investigate how you caught this unfortunate ailment. There was no handshake, no shared cup, no sneeze in a crowded room. The vector of transmission was far more direct and, in the medieval mind, far more scientific. Your illness began the moment you laid eyes on your beloved. And I mean that quite literally. To understand the bizarre and often contradictory advice about medieval romance, you first have to understand their profoundly strange ideas about the simple act of seeing. Today, we know that our eyes are passive receivers. Light from the world around us enters the eye, is focused by the lens, and is interpreted by our brain. Simple. The prevailing scientific theory in the Middle Ages, however, was the complete opposite. This theory, known as extramission, is a core historical fact that unlocks everything else. Inherited from ancient Greek thinkers like Plato and Euclid, it proposed that vision was an active, rather than passive, process. Your eyes, it was believed, did not take in light, they emitted it. Tiny, invisible rays shot out from your pupils, traveling through the air to touch the objects in front of you, and this physical contact is what allowed you to perceive them. Seeing wasn't just observing, it was a form of touching from a distance. Now, apply this wonderfully strange idea to romance. When you look across a crowded room and see the object of your affection, you are not just passively noticing them. You are actively sending out sight rays that travel across the room and physically touch their face, their hair, their hands. These rays then absorb the essence of that person's beauty, a tangible, physical quality, and carry it back along the beam, through your own eyes, and directly into your heart and liver, where it begins to corrupt your humors and start the whole process of lovesickness. The well-worn poetic metaphor of Cupid firing an arrow into your heart was, to the medieval mind, a fairly accurate description of a real, physical event. Love was an airborne pathogen, and the eyes were its open, unguarded entry point. This belief transformed the simple act of looking at someone into a matter of grave importance and high stakes. A glance was not just a glance, it was a physical connection. For a man to stare intently at a woman was not merely rude or creepy, it was an act of aggression, a physical intrusion into her space with his sight beams. It was a low-class, brutish thing to do, a sign of someone with no control over his impulses. For a woman, the rules were even stricter. A virtuous woman's gaze was meant to be guarded at all times. The proper, modest way for a lady to conduct herself in public was with her eyes demurely downcast, studying the floor, her prayer book, or her own hands. To meet a man's gaze directly and hold it was a shockingly forward act, an unambiguous invitation. It was the equivalent of reaching out and touching his hand, a clear signal of her interest and, in the eyes of many, her loose moral character. Your eyes were powerful weapons, and a lady was expected to keep her weapons sheathed. So, what was the advice? How were you supposed to signal interest without causing a scandal or getting a diagnosis? It all came down to the art of the glance. A man wishing to show his admiration was advised to be brief and humble. He could cast a quick, appreciative look, but it should be immediately followed by lowering his own eyes, as if he were overwhelmed by her beauty and his own unworthiness. This showed respect and self-control. A woman, on the other hand, had one primary tool in her arsenal, the quick, sideways peek. The sidelong glance. While keeping her head facing forward or slightly down, she could, for a fleeting second, flick her eyes to the side to meet the gaze of an admirer before immediately looking away, perhaps with a slight blush. This single, tiny movement was electric. It was the perfect compromise, allowing her to acknowledge his interest without sacrificing her modesty. It was a gesture that said, "I see you looking at me, and I am not displeased, but I am a virtuous lady and this is all the encouragement you will get for now." This brings us to a truly quirky tidbit of medieval love theory, the idea of love darts. Some writers believed that the most potent, concentrated rays of love were not emitted from the center of the pupil, but from the corners of the eye. This meant that a direct, head-on look was actually less effective at transmitting the venom of love than a quick, angular glance. The sidelong peek was therefore not just a concession to modesty, it was the most scientifically efficient way to fire a dart of affection directly into the heart of an admirer. It's a fascinating chicken and egg question, and historians and literary scholars still debate it. Was the intense focus on the power of the eyes in medieval poetry and romance simply a reflection of this widely held scientific belief and extramission? Or was the scientific theory just a convenient and elaborate way to rationalize the already powerful and universal poetic metaphor of love at first sight? Whatever the answer, the practical result was the same. Your eyes were a loaded weapon, and you were advised to handle them with extreme care. You now understand that your current, feverish condition is the direct result of a single, unguarded moment of eye contact. You either stare too long, or you were the recipient of a particularly potent sidelong glance. Your sight rays made contact, the venom of beauty was exchanged, and your humors are now paying the price. The first step to navigating this world is complete. You know that love is a sickness, and its point of entry is the eye. Your next challenge will be to find a way to communicate your feelings without ever having to risk the dangers of another direct look. Having established that your love sickness is a serious medical condition transmitted through the eyes, your next problem becomes one of communication. How do you convey the depth of your passion to the person who caused it, without risking another dose of those dangerous beauty rays? Direct, spoken conversation was often seen as far too forward, too bold, especially for a first approach. You can't just walk up to them and say you're interested. No, you must turn to a safer, more respectable medium, the written word. Before you even pick up a quill, however, you must acknowledge that this particular romantic strategy was largely the privilege of the nobility and the very wealthy. Widespread literacy was centuries away, so for the vast majority of the population, the art of the love letter was about as accessible as the art of alchemy. But for you, in your position of relative comfort, it is the next logical step. Even then, it's unlikely you would write the letter yourself. You would likely dictate your profound and intimate feelings to a third party, a professional scribe or perhaps the castle chaplain, a man valued for his literacy and discretion. Imagine trying to compose a heartfelt, romantic message while a priest sits opposite you, patiently scratching away, perhaps offering a helpful suggestion on word choice. The whole process was, by its very nature, a bit impersonal. This impersonality was reinforced by the fact that letter writing, or ars dictaminis as it was formally known, was a highly structured, rhetorical discipline. This is a crucial historical fact to grasp. A letter was not a spontaneous outpouring of emotion, it was a formal composition, like a legal argument or a sermon, that was expected to follow a strict 5-part structure. To deviate from this structure was to show yourself as uneducated and unrefined. Your lesson begins with part 1, the salutatio, or the salutation. This was more than just dear sir or madam. The greeting had to perfectly reflect your social standing in relation to the recipient. To a superior, you would be effusive, to the most noble and radiant star in all the firmament, from her most humble and unworthy servant. To an equal, it might be more balanced. To my esteemed and gracious friend, a greeting of sincere affection. Getting the salutation wrong was a major faux pas, like showing up to a formal dinner in your pajamas. Next came part 2, the captatio benevolentiae, which literally means the securing of goodwill. This was the flattery section, designed to put your reader in a pleasant and receptive mood. Here, you would praise their virtues, their wisdom, their charity, and of course, their unparalleled beauty. You might compare their eyes to stars, their cheeks to roses, and their voice to the music of angels. The goal was to butter them up so thoroughly that they couldn't possibly reject the message that was to follow. Only then could you proceed to part 3, the narratio, or the narration. This was the body of your letter, where you finally explained your situation. But you wouldn't just say, "I have a crush on you." You would tell a story. You would narrate the history of your affliction, starting with the moment you first laid eyes on them, that fateful, dangerous glance from our last section. You would then detail the symptoms of the lovesickness that has plagued you ever since, a direct callback to your diagnosis in section 1, describing your sleepless nights, your loss of appetite, and your constant, obsessive thoughts. You are presenting yourself as a patient, a victim of their overwhelming beauty. This leads logically to part 4, the petitio, or the petition. This is your request, the ask. But after presenting yourself as a lowly, suffering servant, your petition had to be incredibly humble. You wouldn't ask for a date. You would beg for a sliver of hope, a single kind word, a merciful glance that might serve as a cure for your suffering. You were placing your life in their hands, and your request had to reflect that desperate, lowly position. Finally, you would end with part 5, the conclusio, or the conclusion. This was a final summary of your devotion, a vow of eternal service and loyalty, regardless of whether your petition was granted. You would remain their humble servant forever, their prisoner of love until the end of time. You would sign off, and your masterpiece of emotional bureaucracy would be complete. Within this rigid structure, the language itself was expected to be flowery and poetic. Plain speaking was for peasants. You would use elaborate metaphors and classical allusions. A particularly clever and quirky way to personalize such a formal document was to write an acrostic poem within it, where the first letter of each line spelled out your beloved's name, a hidden message just for them within a very public format. Scholars of courtly literature often debate how much of this elaborate, self-deprecating language represented genuine personal emotion versus a formulaic performance of a well-understood social script. Was the writer truly feeling like a humble, dying servant, or were they simply using the accepted formulas to signal their noble education and good breeding? The answer is likely a bit of both. Once your letter was composed, folded, and sealed with wax, you would never dream of delivering it yourself. That would be far too bold. You would entrust it to a discreet go-between, a trusted servant, a page boy, or perhaps a traveling minstrel, who would deliver it and await a potential reply. Now, all you can do is wait, hoping your carefully structured praise, your tale of woe, and your humble petition have done their work. While your carefully composed letter makes its slow and uncertain journey via your trusted go-between, you are left with a new kind of anxiety. What if your beloved agrees to grant you a glance? What if you find yourself at the same feast or festival? All your poetic praise will fall flat if the physical reality doesn't live up to the hype. And so, you must turn your attention to the next crucial stage of medieval courtship, cultivating the perfect look. This is not a simple matter of grooming, it is an arduous, often painful, and sometimes dangerous commitment to the bizarre beauty standards of the age. Forget modern ideals of athletic bodies or sun-kissed skin. The ideal female form, as depicted in countless medieval manuscripts and tapestries, was one of ethereal, almost fragile, elegance. The perfect woman was tall and slender, with a long, graceful neck like a swan, narrow shoulders, and a pale, luminous complexion. But the most important and, to our eyes, the strangest requirement was a high, domed forehead. A vast, rounded forehead was considered the absolute pinnacle of beauty, a clear sign of intelligence, aristocracy, and a noble spirit. And you were expected to achieve this look through a dedicated campaign of hair removal. This is a mainstream historical fact of medieval beauty culture. Women would painstakingly pluck their hairlines, sometimes by an inch or more, to create the illusion of a higher brow. They would also pluck their eyebrows into thin, barely their arches, further enhancing the sense of a wide, open, and placidly intelligent face. Imagine the sheer dedication, the time spent with tweezers, pulling out hair after hair, all to achieve a look that today we would find startling. It was the medieval equivalent of contouring, but instead of a brush, your primary tool was pain. Next on the list was skin. A tan was the mark of the peasant, a sign that you spent your days toiling in the fields. To be beautiful was to be pale, and aristocratic women went to extreme lengths to achieve a complexion that was less healthy glow and more artistic rendering of a ghost. They would shield themselves from the sun with hats and veils, but the real work was done with cosmetics. The most popular foundation of the day was called ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar, which was slathered on the face, neck, and chest to create a smooth, porcelain white finish. The only problem, of course, was that lead is a deadly poison. So, while you were achieving the perfect pale look, the cosmetic was slowly poisoning you, causing skin damage, hair loss, and eventually, organ failure. It's a sobering reminder that the concept of a toxic beauty industry is not exactly a modern invention. Fair, golden hair was another essential component of the ideal. While some women were naturally blessed, many others turned to potent concoctions to lighten their locks. You might spend hours sitting in the sun with a mixture of lemon juice and olive oil on your hair, a method that has surprisingly stood the test of time. Or, for more stubborn cases, you might resort to a harsh bleaching agent made from ingredients like lye, saffron, and cumin seeds. The goal was a halo of light, golden hair to frame your pale, high forehead. This brings us to the eyes, which, as we've already learned, were the superweapons of medieval romance. To make them appear even more captivating and luminous, women would use drops made from a plant called belladonna, a quirky and incredibly dangerous beauty tidbit. Belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade, is highly toxic, but in small, diluted doses, it has the effect of dilating the pupils. This would give the eyes a dark, soulful, wide-eyed look that was considered immensely attractive. The trade-off, aside from the risk of accidentally poisoning yourself, was that it made your vision blurry. You might look beautiful, but you wouldn't be able to clearly see the person you're trying to attract. It was the ultimate case of suffering for your art. Compared to these extreme measures, the use of color cosmetics was relatively subdued. A natural look was preferred. A slight, rosy flush on the cheeks might be achieved with crushed mulberries or the root of the alkanet plant. The same plant-based stains could be used to give the lips a subtle red tint. The overall effect was not one of heavy makeup, but of a strange, otherworldly perfection, a snow-white face, a vast forehead, luminous dark eyes, and a small splash of red on the lips. Historians debate how widespread these extreme beauty practices were. Were they confined only to the highest echelons of the royal court, where a woman's appearance could be a matter of political importance? Or did the wife of a wealthy town merchant also pluck her hairline and whiten her skin with lead, trying to keep up with the trends set by the nobility? The evidence is sparse, but the ideals were pervasive in the art and literature that trickled down through society. And what of the men? While they were largely spared the poisonous cosmetics and painful plucking, a male ideal of beauty certainly existed. The perfect man was fair-haired and fair-skinned, tall, and strong, his physique honed by the martial training we saw in the castle yard. He was typically clean-shaven, or if he had a beard, it was neatly trimmed. His attractiveness was less about artifice and more about displaying the physical prowess and good health that signaled his status as a capable warrior and provider. So, you now have the look. Your forehead is high, your skin is a ghostly white, your eyes are unnervingly large, and your hair is a shade of gold achieved through questionable chemistry. It is a mask of ideal beauty, carefully constructed and painfully maintained. It is the face you hope your beloved will see, a face designed to be worthy of the elaborate, poetic praise you have already sent. You have dispatched your letter, a masterwork of formal prose and poetic longing. You have plucked and plastered yourself into a pale, highbrowed vision of ideal beauty. And now, you wait. The waiting, however, can feel like its own form of lovesickness. You need a way to keep your presence in your beloved's mind, a gentle reminder of your devotion that is less formal than another 5-part letter and certainly less dangerous than direct eye contact. For this, you must turn to the subtle, silent, and deeply symbolic world of gifts. In a society where open, direct communication about affairs of the heart was often discouraged, objects had to do the talking. A gift was never just a gift, it was a vessel for a coded message, a way to speak volumes without ever uttering a word. The most nuanced and widely practiced form of this silent conversation was the use of flowers. While the idea of a rigid, dictionary-like language of flowers is mostly a later, Victorian invention, the mainstream historical fact is that the medieval world was steeped in floral symbolism. Flowers were an essential part of religious and secular art, and specific blooms were strongly associated with specific virtues and emotions. To send a red rose was the most classic and direct of messages, a clear symbol of deep, passionate love. A white lily, so often associated with the Virgin Mary in religious art, signified the purity and virtue of the recipient. To give a violet was to signal your own humility and, more importantly, your faithfulness and constancy. The humble periwinkle, sometimes called the sorcerer's violet, was thought to be an emblem of burgeoning affection and was a common feature in love potions and charms. The art lay in the delivery. You wouldn't send a massive, ostentatious bouquet, that would be as subtle as shouting your intentions across the Great Hall. Instead, you might leave a single, perfect red rose on a bench in a garden where you know your beloved will soon be walking. A lady might weave a few violets into her hair before attending a feast, a silent signal to an admirer across the room that she valued his faithfulness. It was a delicate and beautiful game of symbols, a way to have a conversation through color and fragrance. Beyond flowers, many other small tokens could carry a powerful romantic charge. A lady might bestow her glove upon a knight as a sign of great favor. For him to receive it was an honor, for him to wear it, perhaps tucked into his helmet during a tournament, was a public declaration of his devotion to her. Similarly, a lady's girdle, or belt, was a very personal item, and to give it to a suitor was a sign of significant intimacy and trust. Even a simple piece of fruit could be laden with meaning. An apple, for instance, was a loaded symbol. It could be a gesture of temptation, evoking the story of the Garden of Eden, or it could be a tribute to the recipient's beauty, recalling the myth of the Judgment of Paris, where a golden apple was awarded to the most beautiful goddess. The gift was simple, but the message it carried could be deeply resonant. A man might also demonstrate his prowess by sending a bird he had brought down while hawking, a gift that said both "I think of you" and "I am a skilled and capable provider." This practice, however, could take a turn for the truly bizarre. One of the most wonderfully strange and quirky tidbits of medieval love gifting was the love apple. A young man might take a fresh, peeled apple, or sometimes an orange, and hold it in his armpit for a period of time, until the fruit was completely saturated with his own sweat. He would then present this love apple to the object of his affection. The underlying belief was that his personal scent, his very essence, would be so intoxicating that one sniff of the sweat-soaked fruit would cause her to fall madly in love with him. It is a potent reminder that the medieval concept of romance was often far more earthy and far less hygienic than the polished tales of chivalry might suggest. Of course, this reliance on symbolism created a minefield of potential misinterpretation. Historians debate how much of this complex language of objects was universally understood. Was it a sophisticated code used only by the highly educated members of the court, with meanings that could shift from region to region? Or was it a more general folk tradition that most people would have understood? When you receive a gift of a pear from an admirer, is he simply sharing a piece of fruit, or is he making a rather more intimate suggestion, given the fruit's symbolism in some contexts? The anxiety of trying to correctly decipher a gift's meaning was a very real part of the courtship dance. You now possess another set of tools for your romantic quest. You can communicate through the humble violet, the passionate rose, the noble glove, or, if you're feeling particularly bold, the alarmingly personal love apple. You are learning that in this world, romance is a quiet and intricate puzzle. Every object, every color, every scent can be a clue, a test, or a declaration. Your courtship is becoming a silent conversation, a story told not with words, but with the fragile, beautiful, and deeply meaningful things you choose to give and receive. Days, perhaps even weeks, have passed since you dispatched your letter. You have worn the appropriate flowers, you have cultivated the perfect pale complexion, and still, nothing. No reply. No encouraging glance. The silence from your beloved is deafening, and your love sickness, far from abating, has settled into a chronic, weary ache. Patience is a virtue, but yours is wearing thin. Your mind, clouded by obsession and melancholy, begins to wander down darker, more desperate paths. If poetry, symbolism, and beauty have failed, perhaps it is time for a more direct intervention. It is time to consider a love potion. You must understand that in the medieval world, the lines we draw today between science, medicine, faith, and magic were incredibly blurry. The same physician who diagnosed your love sickness based on Greek medical theory might also consult the stars to choose a treatment time. The world was seen as a place full of hidden sympathies and secret powers, and for the right price, or with the right knowledge, those powers could be bent to your will. So, your next step is not a visit to another scholar, but a furtive trip to the outskirts of the village, to the small, smoky cottage of a cunning woman. She is a local herbalist and healer, a woman who knows the old ways. Her knowledge of plants is vast, but her practice hovers in the gray area between folk medicine and forbidden magic. The church would call her a sorceress. The villagers, however, would call on her for a charm to protect their livestock, a poultice for a wound that won't heal, or, in your case, a little something to sway a stubborn heart. Your transaction is carried out in hushed tones, away from prying eyes, because what you are asking for is both illegal and deeply sinful. The theory behind her concoctions is not one of chemistry, but of sympathetic magic, the ancient belief that like produces like, and that objects that share a resemblance also share a mystical connection. The ingredients for your potion will be chosen not for their chemical properties, but for their symbolic power. She begins by listing the necessary herbs, some of which are genuinely potent. She names verbena and periwinkle, plants long associated with love charms. Then she mentions the most powerful of all, the mandrake root. This is a quirky and fascinating element of medieval magic. The mandrake root often forks as it grows, vaguely resembling a small human figure. This resemblance gave it immense power in sympathetic magic. But it was also famously dangerous to acquire. The wise woman tells you the old tale, that when the mandrake is pulled from the earth, it lets out a blood-curdling scream so powerful it will kill anyone who hears it. The only safe way to harvest it, she explains, was to tie a rope from the plant to a dog, then call the dog from a safe distance, letting the poor animal take the brunt of the root's death cry. The potion requires more than just plants. To bind the recipient's heart, you need something from the animal kingdom that embodies love or devotion. The heart of a turtle dove, a bird known for mating for life, might be required. Or perhaps the brain of a sparrow, a creature seen as lusty and energetic. To us, it's gruesome. To the medieval mind, it was a logical transfer of essential properties. And then comes the most potent and taboo category of ingredients, those taken from a human body. The wise woman might ask you for a few strands of your own hair, a clipping from your fingernail, or even a drop of your blood. These personal items, when added to the brew, would create an undeniable, magical link between you and the person who drinks it. It is the magical equivalent of the sweaty love apple you learned about earlier, but far more powerful and far more dangerous. As you gather these strange and unsettling ingredients, you are keenly aware that you are committing a serious crime. This is a mainstream historical fact that cannot be overstated. The use of love potions was considered a form of malicious witchcraft. It was seen as an attempt to subvert God's greatest gift to humanity, free will. To magically force someone to love you was a demonic act, a perversion of the natural order. If you were caught, the punishments would be severe, for both you and the cunning woman. You could be forced to publicly confess your sins, you could be fined, flogged, or, in some cases, face accusations of witchcraft, which carried a death sentence. Historians and folklorists often debate how widespread these practices truly were. Are the surviving texts that list these bizarre recipes a genuine reflection of common folk magic, or are they primarily church propaganda, lurid lists of forbidden activities created to show the faithful what sins they must avoid? It is impossible to know for sure how many of these strange potions were actually brewed and administered. But here you are, with a small, stoppered clay vial in your hand. The liquid inside is murky and smells of damp earth, iron, and something faintly sweet. The final, terrifying step is to somehow get your beloved to drink it. It would have to be secretly stirred into their wine at a feast, or mixed into a piece of cake. It is an act of supreme deception. There is no going back. You have traveled a long way from the polite, formal poetry of your first love letter. You have moved past the gentle symbolism of flowers. Driven by the ache of your lovesickness, you have arrived at the dark and desperate crossroads of magic and coercion. The potion in your hand feels heavy, a tangible weight of risk, sin, and hope. The only question left is whether you have the nerve to use it. You stand with the small, murky vial in your hand, the strange potion feeling heavy with risk and moral compromise. You think of your beloved's face, and you think of the dark path of coercion you are about to walk. And in a moment of profound clarity, you decide against it. You pour the strange concoction onto the ground, where it soaks into the earth and is gone. There must be a better, nobler way to love. If you must suffer from this illness of the heart, you decide you will at least suffer beautifully. And so, you turn your back on the world of folk magic and enter the strange, refined, and often agonizing world of courtly love. If the love potion represents the desperate, earthy underbelly of medieval romance, courtly love is its highest, most polished, and poetic expression. You must understand that this was not a guide to dating for the average person. This was a sophisticated, literary, and cultural ideal that flourished in the wealthy, aristocratic courts of France and England. The central, mainstream historical fact of courtly love, or fine amours as it was known, is that it was almost never about marriage. In fact, it almost required the object of your affection to be completely unattainable, and the most common way for a lady to be unattainable was for her to be already married, preferably to your own lord. This sounds like a recipe for disaster, but it operated according to a very specific and bizarre set of rules. Your first step is to completely redefine your relationship. You are not a suitor trying to win a wife. You are now a humble vassal, and the lady is your liege lord, or domina. You swear fealty to her in your heart, dedicating your entire existence to her service. She, in turn, holds all the power. Her role is to remain distant, aloof, and to test your devotion through a series of cruel or whimsical trials. In this strange new game, your lovesickness is no longer a shameful illness to be cured, it is your badge of honor. Your suffering is the proof of your sincerity. The pale face, the sleepless nights, the loss of appetite, these are now the signs of your noble and sensitive soul. You are expected to languish, to sigh poetically, and to compose sad poems about your beautiful suffering. The agony, in a very real sense, is the point of the relationship. It is a love defined by its perpetual, unfulfilled longing. The ultimate goal of this agonizing devotion was not physical union, but self-improvement. The love you felt for your unattainable lady was meant to be a refining fire. To be worthy of even a single kind glance from her, you had to become a better man. You were inspired to be more courageous in battle, fighting in her name. You had to be more courteous and well-mannered at court, so as not to embarrass her. You had to learn to write poetry and play music to properly express the depth of your passion. Your hopeless love was the engine of your own moral and chivalric perfection. This complex set of rules and ideals led to the creation of one of history's most quirky and fascinating social inventions, the courts of love. These were gatherings, supposedly presided over by powerful noblewomen like Eleanor of Aquitaine, where lovers could bring their romantic dilemmas to be debated and judged. The proceedings were like a combination of a formal legal court and a literary salon. A knight might present a case: "My lady has commanded me not to speak to her for a full year to test my love, but I saw her smile at another knight at the feast. Has she broken the rules?" The assembled ladies would then debate the fine points of the case before issuing a formal verdict. One of the most famous judgments from these courts was the answer to the question, "Can true love exist between married people?" The court's answer was a resounding no, as true love had to be freely given, whereas marriage was a binding contract. This, of course, leads to the single greatest scholarly debate surrounding this topic: was courtly love ever a real-life social practice? Or was it purely a literary invention? Did knights and ladies truly conduct these elaborate, non-physical affairs for years on end? Or was this just a sophisticated game they played in their songs and poems, a form of escapist fantasy that had little to do with their actual lives? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. The ideals of courtly love almost certainly influenced how real people thought and spoke about romance, even if they didn't follow the rules to the letter. This idealized, spiritual form of love stood in stark contrast to the reality of medieval marriage for the nobility, which was rarely about love at all. Marriage was a contract, a merger of lands, wealth, and bloodlines, arranged by parents with practical goals in mind. Courtly love, then, provided a necessary fantasy, an outlet for the powerful romantic and emotional passions that the rigid structure of aristocratic marriage could not contain. You have now chosen this path. You have forsaken the hope of a simple, attainable relationship for the sublime, artistic suffering of a courtly lover. You will channel your lovesickness into beautiful poems. You will perform deeds of great valor in the name of a lady who may barely acknowledge your existence. You will treat your unfulfilled desire not as a problem to be solved, but as a sacred flame to be tended. It is a strange, illogical, and deeply impractical way to live, but in the high-minded courts of the 12th and 13th centuries, it was the very height of romance. You have now fully embraced your new role as the noble, suffering courtly lover. You have dedicated yourself to a path of beautiful, poetic agony in the service of your unattainable lady. But there is a flaw in your plan. Silent suffering, no matter how artistically rendered in your own mind, goes unnoticed. Your private, lovesick sighs are lovely, but they don't exactly broadcast your devotion across a crowded feast hall. If your suffering is to be a work of art, it needs a gallery. If your love is a story, it needs a narrator. For this, you must turn to the medieval equivalent of a pop star and a public relations agent all rolled into one, the troubadour. In an age without mass media, these traveling musicians and poets were the lifeblood of culture and communication. A skilled minstrel or troubadour was a welcome guest at any castle, bringing news from distant courts, reciting epic poems, and, most importantly for you, singing songs of love. They were the masters of emotion, the professional performers of the very feelings you were trying so desperately to navigate. And their services were available for hire. Your next step, then, is to arrange a discreet meeting with a visiting musician. You will not simply request a song. You will commission a bespoke work of art. In a quiet corner of the Bailey, you pour out your heart to this stranger with a lute. You tell him of your lady's transcendent beauty, her eyes like stars, her hair like spun gold. You describe the profound and noble suffering she has inflicted upon you, the fever of your lovesickness, your inability to eat or sleep. You are providing the raw, emotional material, and he, the skilled craftsman, will now shape it into a masterpiece. He will compose a canso, a love song built according to strict poetic and melodic conventions. The lyrics, of course, will be steeped in the language of courtly love that you have come to embody. The song will paint a picture of you as the most devoted and humble of servants, and your lady as the most perfect, angelic, and cruelly distant of masters. The song will not be a simple declaration of "I love you." It will be a complex exploration of your beautiful misery, your unwavering loyalty in the face of her indifference, and your hope for a single glance of pity that might save you from the sweet torment of your passion. And crucially, to maintain the all-important rule of secrecy, your lady will not be mentioned by her real name. The troubadour will use a senil, a secret code name for her known only to you, him, and, hopefully, the lady herself. She might be Fair Face, or Sweet Sorrow, a poetic mask that allows you to praise her publicly while maintaining plausible deniability. The true magic happens at the performance. Imagine you are at the great midday dinner. The lord is at the high table, the hall is full of chatter. At a lull in the meal, the troubadour steps into the center of the hall. He tunes his lute, a hush falls over the crowd, and he announces he will perform a new song he has just composed, about a noble heart suffering from the sweet arrows of love. And then he begins to sing. His voice is clear and trained, rising up into the smoky rafters. The melody is haunting and beautiful. And the words? The words are your own secret feelings, transformed into public art. The troubadour is your proxy, your romantic spokesperson. This is a mainstream historical fact of the period. These musicians were essential intermediaries. He can express emotions with a dramatic flair that would be unseemly for a stoic knight like yourself. He can weep poetically, he can praise extravagantly, he can lament his fate dramatically. He performs your love for you, allowing you to sit at the trestle table, maintaining a dignified silence, while your innermost feelings are broadcast to the entire court. All you have to do is try not to look too obvious as you sneak a glance at your lady to see if the song is having its desired effect. Of course, if you are a particularly accomplished and ambitious lover, you could attempt the do-it-yourself approach. You could spend long, frustrating hours learning to play the lute, your fingertips growing calloused, your voice cracking as you try to master the difficult melodies. But to be able to sit in the solar during the afternoon's leisure and perform your own sad, beautiful songs of devotion was the ultimate power move in the game of courtly love. It was a direct transmission of your artistic soul. The art of the love song was so central to courtly life that it even spawned its own quirky forms of entertainment. At some feasts, you might witness a tournament, or a tournament of song. This was a poetic debate set to music, where two troubadours would take opposing sides on a fine point of love. They might argue, for instance, whether it is nobler to love a lady who is kind and merciful, or one who is cruel and distant. It was a form of intellectual sport, a medieval rap battle for romantics, demonstrating just how seriously these ideas were taken. The sad irony is that while we have the texts for thousands of these beautiful poems, we have lost the music for most of them. Musicologists and historians still debate the actual sound of this music. The notation that survives is often just a skeleton, giving a hint of the melody but nothing of the rhythm or instrumentation. It leaves us with a beautiful but ghostly impression, a library of silent songs, which is somehow perfectly fitting for a genre of love that was itself so often about silence and longing. For now, though, the music is alive. It is your voice, your hope, your pain, all packaged in a beautiful melody and performed by a professional. You have successfully weaponized music in your campaign of courtship, turning your private suffering into a public spectacle of artistic devotion. Your song has been sung. The final, lingering notes from the troubadour's lute have faded, but the message now hangs in the air of the great hall, a public secret whispered among the court. Your devotion is no longer a private malady, it is a celebrated, artistic performance. The feast itself, the very stage for your musical declaration, now becomes your next arena. Direct conversation is still off the table, but as you take your seat for the next course, you realize that the strict, formal etiquette of the medieval dinner provides a whole new language for flirtation. A grand feast was one of the few places where men and women of the court could socialize in a semi-public setting. But it was a far cry from a casual dinner party. It was a highly structured and scrutinized event, a public performance where your manners, your appetite, and your every gesture were on display. For a hopeful lover, this environment was both a challenge and an opportunity. You were likely seated a great distance from your beloved lady, making any interaction a long-distance affair, but this distance also made every small signal that crossed the gap even more powerful and significant. Your first lesson in tableside courtship involves the simple act of drinking. As you know, it was common practice to share a drinking cup with your neighbors. The standard rule of etiquette, a mainstream historical fact of medieval dining, was to politely wipe the rim of the cup with your napkin before passing it on. This is where a subtle game could be played. You might watch as the communal cup makes its way down the table to your lady. She takes a drink, politely wipes the rim, and passes it on. But as it comes back around, you might notice her drink again. And this time, she makes a point of drinking from the exact same spot on the rim that you just used. To anyone else, it's an insignificant detail. To you, it's a thunderclap. It's an intimate, almost invisible gesture that acknowledges a connection, a secret sharing that separates the two of you from everyone else at the table. The giving of food was an even more powerful tool. It was a well-established custom for a person of high status to send a choice morsel from their own plate to someone of a lower rank as a sign of favor or respect. A lord might send a particularly fine slice of venison down to a favored knight. This custom could be easily adapted for romantic purposes. If your lady, seated at the high table, were to catch your eye and then instruct a servant to bring you a single perfect strawberry or a delicate sugared almond from her own dessert plate, the message would be unmistakable. It's a public honor, a gesture of favor that tells the whole room she holds you in high esteem, and it tells you, privately, that your advances are not entirely unwelcome. If by some stroke of luck you were seated near her, you had the opportunity to be the giver. You could, for instance, offer to carve a piece of meat for her from a shared roast. This allowed you to perform a direct, chivalrous service, demonstrating your skill with a knife and your attentiveness to her needs. The simple act of placing a perfectly carved piece of quail on her trencher was an act of devotion in miniature. Speaking of trenchers, this brings us to one of the most peculiar and intimate gestures of the medieval feast. The trencher, you'll recall, was a thick slab of stale bread used as a plate. By the end of a course, it would be soaked through with the gravies, sauces, and juices from the food it had held. This leads to a quirky tidbit of tableside romance, the sharing of the trencher. After a course, a man might take his gravy-soaked bread plate, cut it in half, eat one half himself, and have a servant deliver the other half to the lady he admired. It was the medieval equivalent of saying, "Would you like to share my plate?" An offer of profound intimacy, a sharing of the most basic elements of the meal, even if it seems a bit unhygienic to our modern sensibilities. Of course, the great challenge in all of this was ambiguity, a topic social historians still debate. Were these gestures part of a universally understood code of flirtation, or are we, with our modern romantic gaze, simply reading meaning into what might have been purely practical or accidental actions? When the lady sends you a piece of fish, is it a sign of her favor, or did she simply not care for it? When she drinks from the same spot on the cup, was it intentional, or was she simply not paying attention? The agonizing uncertainty was part of the game. It kept the suffering courtly lover in a state of constant, heightened alertness, endlessly analyzing every tiny gesture for hidden meaning. The feast draws to a close. Throughout the long, multi-course meal, you may not have exchanged a single word with your beloved. And yet, an entire conversation may have taken place. A conversation spoken in the language of shared wine, gifted morsels of food, and carefully carved meat. You have taken the rigid, formal structure of a public meal and turned it into a vehicle for secret, personal connection. It's another subtle, complex, and wonderfully strange layer in the art of medieval romance. The great feast is over. You leave the hall with a quiet thrill, replaying the subtle, secret signals that passed between you and your beloved, the shared glance, the gifted morsel of food. But this thrill is laced with a new and potent anxiety, the cold prickle of awareness that you are not acting in a vacuum. Every person in that hall, from the lord on the dais to the lowest servant clearing the tables, has eyes and ears. You have just performed on a very public stage, and you now must enter the most treacherous phase of your courtship, the battle to protect your reputation. In our modern, anonymous world, reputation can feel like a flexible, abstract concept. In the close-knit, claustrophobic society of a medieval court or town, your reputation was everything. It was your credit score, your social security, and your public identity all rolled into one. It was a tangible asset, a form of currency more valuable than gold. because it determined who would trust you, who would trade with you, and, most importantly, who would consider you or your children worthy of a marriage alliance. And this precious commodity was incredibly fragile. For you, as a man, your reputation is primarily built on your honor. Are you brave in combat? Are you loyal to your lord? Are you pious and generous? Are you a man of your word? A bit of a reputation as a romantic rogue or a charmer might even be a feather in your cap, as long as you act with discretion. For the lady you admire, however, the situation is far more perilous. This is a mainstream historical fact of the period. A noble woman's reputation rested almost exclusively on a single pillar, her chastity, or at least the flawless public performance of it. While your honor could be dented and repaired, her reputation was like a pane of glass. A single crack, a single well-aimed stone of rumor, could shatter it irrevocably. This brings you to the greatest danger in the medieval court: gossip. With no internet, no television, and for most, no books, one of the primary forms of entertainment was observing, analyzing, and discussing the behavior of your peers. The castle walls were not just made of stone, they were made of whispering galleries. The ladies-in-waiting, the squires, the servants polishing the silver, they were a highly efficient, 24-hour news network, and your subtle flirtation at dinner was almost certainly noticed. It is likely already being dissected, interpreted, and embellished in the kitchens and the barracks. So, what was the advice for navigating this treacherous landscape? The first and most important rule was to never, ever be alone together. An unchaperoned conversation, even a brief and innocent one in a corner of the garden, was a screaming invitation for rumor. A lady of quality was expected to be in the constant company of her attendants. A man who respected a lady's honor would never attempt to isolate her from them. The second rule was to be relentless in the public performance of your prescribed role. The lady must be the very picture of modesty. Her dress must not be too revealing, her laughter not too loud, her gaze, as we know, must be demurely downcast. You, in turn, must be the soul of courtesy and respect. You must never speak to her with anything less than the utmost reverence, and you must certainly never, ever boast about any favor she might have shown you. To hint that a lady returned your affections was to publicly tarnish her reputation for your own selfish gain. The act of a dishonorable cad. The seriousness with which medieval society policed public behavior is chillingly illustrated by the quirky and grim tidbit of public shaming punishments. While not always directly tied to courtship, devices like the scold's bridle and iron cage fitted over the head of a woman accused of gossiping or nagging, or the drunkard's cloak, a heavy barrel worn by public inebriates, show a society obsessed with enforcing social norms through public humiliation. Your reputation was a community concern, and the community would not hesitate to enforce its standards. This raises a difficult question for historians: how much power did individuals, particularly women, have to actively shape and defend their own reputations against such a hostile gossip culture? Was a woman simply a passive victim, her good name entirely at the mercy of what others said about her? Or were there recognized strategies, subtle social maneuvers, that she could use to discredit a rumor or bolster her own standing? The records are often silent on these private battles, but the sheer volume of cautionary tales suggests that once the mud of a rumor was slung, it was nearly impossible to wash it all off. The consequences of a ruined reputation were catastrophic. For the lady, it meant the loss of her marriage prospects, the shame of her family, and potentially a life of forced piety and isolation in a nunnery, the only place to send a spoiled noblewoman. For you, being branded as a dishonorable braggart who compromised a lady's good name could mean being shunned by your peers, losing the trust of your lord, and becoming a social outcast. The game of love was being played for the highest possible stakes. You now understand the constant, humming tension beneath the surface of courtly life. Every exchanged glance, every shared song, every symbolic gift is a gamble. You are weighing the thrill of romantic connection against the devastating risk of social ruin. The need for secrecy, which had seemed like a romantic and exciting part of the courtly love game, now reveals itself to be a deadly serious matter of survival. Your courtship is not a private affair of the heart. It is a public tightrope walk, and the whole world is watching, waiting for you to fall. You have played the game masterfully. Your reputation is intact, your songs of devotion have been heard, and your subtle signals at the feast have, you hope, been received and understood. You have followed every strange and bewildering rule in the playbook of courtly love. And it is at this point, standing on the precipice of what feels like romantic success, that a cold, sobering reality begins to dawn on you. For all this time, you have been courting the wrong person. All your poetry, your suffering, Your carefully chosen gifts, they have all been directed at the lady, when the person whose opinion truly matters, the person who holds your entire romantic future in the palm of his hand, is her father. You must now confront the single most important mainstream historical fact of medieval romance and marriage. For the aristocracy, marriage was not a romantic union, but a business transaction. It was a strategic merger between two families, two fortunes, and two political entities. The personal feelings of the prospective bride and groom were, at best, a secondary consideration, and at worst, completely irrelevant. Love was not the foundation of marriage, it was a potential, and often surprising, bonus that might develop later. Or it might not. It didn't really matter. So, while you have been trying to impress the lady with your poetic soul and your noble suffering, her father has been assessing you with a completely different, and far more practical, set of criteria. He is not interested in the quality of your lute playing or the depth of your lovesick sighs. He has a checklist, and it is brutally pragmatic. What lands do you, or your family, possess? What is the purity of your lineage and the power of your coat of arms? What military strength and number of soldiers can you bring to an alliance? What is your reputation for piety, loyalty, and, most importantly, for managing your finances? You are not a potential son-in-law, you are a potential business partner, and he is running the numbers. The process of asking for a lady's hand in marriage, therefore, had nothing to do with the romantic, down-on-one-knee proposal. It was a formal negotiation, initiated not by you, but by the head of your family. Your father, your uncle, or your liege lord would send an official delegation to her father, opening a discussion. This discussion would involve hammering out the details of a legally binding marriage contract. Lawyers would be consulted. The primary topics would be the dowry, the wealth the bride's family would bring to the marriage, and the settlement the groom's family would provide for the bride in return. A quirky and interesting tidbit of this process was the concept of the morning gift, or Morgengabe, a tradition with roots in early Germanic law. This was a specific gift of property or money that the groom promised to the bride herself, to be given to her on the morning after their marriage was consummated. It was her personal property, a form of financial security in case she was widowed. This morning gift was a key point of the marriage contract negotiations, a clear financial valuation placed on the union. And what was the lady's role in all of this? In most cases, she was a passive and silent pawn in the strategic game her family was playing. She was arguably the single most valuable asset her family possessed, a bargaining chip to be used to forge alliances, acquire land, and secure the family's future. Her duty was to be obedient and to marry whomever her father deemed most advantageous. This raises a question that historians still debate: to what extent could a noble woman's personal feelings influence an arranged match? If she had a strong, genuine affection for one suitor, or a deep-seated revulsion for another, could her preference sway her father's decision? In some rare, anecdotal cases, perhaps. But for the most part, a daughter's tears were weighed against the promise of 1,000 acres of new land, and the land almost always won. Her personal happiness was a luxury her family could not afford to prioritize over their own ambition. This reality was made even clearer by the common practice of betrothing children to each other when they were still infants, years before they could even speak, let alone fall in love. So where does this leave your grand, courtly romance? It forces you to see it in a new light. The songs, the poems, the secret glances, they were not a direct path to marriage. They were, in essence, a beautiful and elaborate form of advertising. By performing the role of the perfect courtly lover, you were demonstrating to the father, and to the world, that you were a man of good breeding, refined taste, and noble sentiment. It was a way of making yourself a more attractive business partner. Your lovesickness was part of your resume. You now understand the new, and final, chapter of the game. Your courtship of the daughter was the performance. The negotiation with the father is the reality. The success of your entire romantic endeavor now rests not on the flutter of her heart, but on the cold, hard calculation in his head. You have faced down rivals, you have navigated the treacherous waters of gossip, but your greatest challenge is yet to come. You must prove your worth not as a lover, but as an asset. You have now been confronted with the cold, hard pragmatism of medieval marriage. Your head understands that love is secondary to land, and romance is a footnote on a legal contract. And yet, your heart is still steeped in the beautiful, agonizing ideals of courtly love. How can these two opposing forces, the practical need to impress a father and the romantic need to serve a lady, possibly coexist? The answer lies in the grandest, most colorful, and most dangerous spectacle of the age, the tournament. The tournament is the perfect stage. It is a place where your devotion can be made thrillingly public, and where your skills as a warrior, the very skills a pragmatic father-in-law values most, can be put on spectacular display. You arrive at the tournament grounds to find a scene of festive chaos. Colorful silk pavilions dot the fields. Spectators, from wealthy merchants to high-born ladies, fill the wooden stands. The air is filled with the scent of roasted meat from food stalls, the sound of minstrels playing lively tunes, and the nervous whinnying of powerful warhorses. It is less a sporting event and more a massive, open-air festival. Your focus, however, is on the ceremony before the combat. You watch as the knights, clad in magnificent, polished steel armor, present themselves before the ladies' viewing stand. And here, you witness the pivotal moment, the mainstream historical fact that beautifully weds courtly love to martial prowess. A lady, perhaps the very object of your own affections, leans forward and bestows upon her chosen champion a token. This is her favor. It is not a prize to be won, it is a gift of inspiration to be carried into battle. It might be a silk handkerchief, a long, decorative sleeve from her gown, or simply a ribbon in her family's colors. The knight accepts it with a reverent bow, his head uncovered. He then, with the help of his squire, attaches the favor to a prominent place on his armor, tied around his lance, woven into the crest of his helmet, or pinned to his shoulder. This simple act is a powerful, public declaration. It says to the entire world, everything I do today, I do in this lady's honor. It is the courtly love ideal made manifest, a secret devotion brought into the light in a formal, ritualized, and socially acceptable way. The knight is now not just fighting for a prize or for glory, he is fighting as his lady's champion, and his performance will directly reflect upon her. With the formalities complete, a trumpet sounds, signaling the start of the jousts. The knights mount their enormous horses and take their places at opposite ends of the tilt yard, the long, fenced-in lane known as the lists. The armor they wear is specialized, often heavier and more ornate than what they would wear in an actual war. And, as a quirky but important safety measure, their lances are often blunted. Instead of a sharp point, they might be tipped with a small, three-pronged coronel, designed to catch on an opponent's shield rather than pierce it. These were called armicorduses, or courtesy weapons. Despite this, the danger was still very real. A heavy fall from a horse or a splintered lance hitting a weak point in the armor could, and often did, lead to serious injury or death. Another trumpet blast, and the two knights charge. It is a terrifying and exhilarating sight. The ground trembles under the thunder of the warhorses' hooves. The knights are almost part of their mounts, encased in steel, two hurtling missiles of muscle and metal. They lower their lances at the last possible second, aiming for the opponent's shield. Then comes the impact, a sound like a bolt of lightning striking an oak tree. A tremendous, splintering crash as 12-foot lances, moving at high speed, explode against steel shields. If the knight wearing your lady's favor strikes true, shattering his lance while remaining firmly in his saddle, a great cheer goes up from the crowd. He has won the point. He has proven his skill, and he has brought honor to the lady whose colors he wears. He might salute her with a dip of his lance before turning to prepare for the next run. This grand spectacle leads to a debate that continues among historians to this day. Was the tournament primarily a form of practical military training, a way to keep knights in peak fighting condition during times of peace? Or had it evolved into a highly ritualized and fabulously expensive form of social theater, more akin to a modern professional sport, where pageantry and status were more important than actual combat skills? Watching the sheer theatricality of the event, with its favors and fanfares, you can see the argument for social display. But feeling the ground shake and seeing the violence of the impact, you can also see the brutal effectiveness of it as practice for war. The jousting is often followed by the melee, a chaotic mock battle where two large teams of knights fight in an open field. It is a swirling, clanging chaos of blunted swords, maces, and axes, and even better, and more dangerous, simulation of a real battlefield. Here, a knight's courage, strength, and ability to work within a team are put to the ultimate test. As the day ends and the victors are declared, you understand the unique power of the tournament. It is the only place where the two competing demands on a nobleman, the romantic and the pragmatic, are fused into one glorious spectacle. In the lists, the knight can be both the humble, suffering servant of a distant lady and the brutally effective warrior a father-in-law would want protecting his lands. For a few glorious, heart-pounding hours, winning a lady's affection and proving your material worth can be achieved with the very same act. The tournament is where the poetry of courtly love is written with a splintered lance. The roar of the tournament crowd has long since faded, and the splintered lances have been cleared from the field. The public spectacle is over, and you are once again alone with your thoughts in the quiet of your chamber. The day's excitement gives way to the deep stillness of the night, and in this quiet, your hopes and anxieties about your romantic quest begin to churn. You have analyzed every glance, every gift, every song, every gesture. Now, you must turn to the final and most mysterious source of romantic intelligence, your own dreams. In the medieval worldview, dreams were not the random firings of the resting brain, as we see them today. This is a mainstream historical fact crucial to understanding their mindset. Dreams were considered a permeable boundary, a thin veil between the waking world and the supernatural. A dream could be a divine message from God, a deceptive temptation from a demon, a vision of a future event, or a direct reflection of the state of one's physical and spiritual health. To ignore your dreams was to ignore a vital source of information about the universe and your place in it. This belief gave rise to a popular genre of literature known as dream books, or somnia. These were essentially dictionaries of dream symbolism, providing interpretations for all manner of dream images. And for a lovesick person like yourself, anxiously awaiting some sign of your romantic fate, the dream book was an essential guide to the strange theater of your sleeping mind. Imagine you are trying to decipher last night's visions. You might consult a book or the wisdom of a local dream reader to understand their meaning. The advice you receive would be specific and deeply symbolic. If you dreamed of a clear, bubbling spring or a beautiful, clear river, it was a very good omen, signifying that your love was pure and your path forward would be smooth and successful. To dream of a walled garden, filled with flowers in full bloom, was even better, a classic symbol of reciprocated love and future happiness. If you dreamed of birds singing sweetly on a branch, it meant you would soon receive good news from your beloved. To dream of putting a new ring on your own finger was a clear and joyful prophecy of a future union. Conversely, the dream world was also filled with dire warnings. To dream of muddy, murky, or turbulent water was a sign of great trouble. It could mean your courtship was fraught with deceit and hidden dangers, or that your beloved's feelings were impure. To dream of a storm or a tempest was to be warned of a great emotional upheaval or a coming conflict in your quest for love. One of the most common and feared omens was dreaming that one of your teeth had fallen out, a near-universal symbol of loss that, in a romantic context, could only mean the loss of your beloved. Some of the symbolism was even more specific and, to our minds, quite quirky. A particularly bizarre but common interpretation found in many dream books was that if you dreamed of being bald, it was a sure sign that your beloved was being unfaithful to you, or that you were about to lose their affection entirely. On the other hand, to dream of finding or holding a key was a wonderful omen, for it meant that you would soon find the way to unlock your beloved's heart. This entire practice raises a fascinating question that historians and psychologists still debate. Were these dream books taken as literal, prophetic truth, providing a genuine window into the future? Or did they serve more as a kind of psychological tool, a structured framework that allowed people to process their own waking hopes and fears? Much like a modern horoscope, the interpretations were often just vague enough that a person could project their own situation onto them, finding the guidance they were already looking for. It gave a sense of order and meaning to the chaotic, anxious world of the subconscious. Your lovesickness, of course, would have a direct impact on your dreams. The physicians who diagnosed your condition believed that the excess of hot, dry humors caused by your passion would lead to agitated, anxious, and vivid dreams. Your nightly visions were, in a way, just another symptom of your illness, a fever of the imagination. The interpretation of your dreams was not a passive activity, it was meant to guide your actions in the waking world. If you had a positive dream, of the blooming garden, say, you would be filled with new confidence. You might be bolder in your next approach, more confident in sending another gift or commissioning another song. If, however, you had a nightmare of a falling tooth, you would be filled with dread. You might pull back, become more cautious, or perhaps seek spiritual guidance from the chaplain, asking for a prayer to ward off the evil that had been foretold. You now have a new and deeply personal source of dating advice. You have learned to scrutinize the nightly productions of your own mind for clues and prophecies. It is an uncertain and deeply unreliable method, but in a world where the affections of another person could seem so mysterious and out of reach, it was only natural to look for answers in the equally mysterious world that lay on the other side of sleep. You wake from a night of troubled, symbolic dreams, the meaning of which remains frustratingly unclear. You have sought answers from doctors, poets, musicians, and your own subconscious, and yet, you feel no closer to peace. Your obsession, this lingering lovesickness, now feels less like a noble calling and more like a heavy weight upon your soul. And so, you are driven to seek guidance from the ultimate authority on all matters of the heart and soul, the final arbiter of all human action, the Church. You have learned the rules of medicine, of poetry, of gift-giving, and of public reputation. Now you must confront the spiritual rules, and you will find that the advice offered by the Church is perhaps the most bewildering of all, because it is steeped in a profound and difficult contradiction. The central message of your faith is, of course, love. To love God with all your heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. But the kind of love you are feeling, the intense, romantic, all-consuming passion for a single person, known as eros, was viewed with deep suspicion. It was a worldly, fleshly, and selfish love that was seen as a dangerous distraction from your primary duty, and a slippery slope towards the deadly sin of lust. You might find yourself in the quiet of the chapel, confessing your turmoil to the castle priest. As you detail your sleepless nights, your constant thoughts of your beloved, and the elaborate games of courtship you have been playing, you should not expect sympathy or romantic advice. The priest would listen patiently, and then he would likely tell you that your lovesickness is not a noble affliction, but a spiritual malady. He would tell you that the intense devotion you feel for this mortal woman is a form of love that rightfully belongs only to God. The Church's official stance on the ideals of courtly love was particularly harsh. This is a mainstream historical fact that stands in stark opposition to the romantic literature of the day. The entire system you have so carefully learned, the worshipful service to a lady, treating her as your domino or goddess, suffering beautifully for her, was condemned as a form of idolatry. You were placing a human being in the space reserved for God. Furthermore, since the object of courtly love was so often a married woman, the entire genre was seen as a thinly veiled and deeply sinful glorification of adultery. Your poetic pining was, in the eyes of the Church, simply adultery of the heart. The advice you would receive from the priest would be clear and direct. You must cool your passions. You must redirect your powerful capacity for love towards heaven. He would prescribe a regimen of prayer and fasting. He might instruct you to recite a certain number of psalms every day, or to kneel on the cold stone floor for an hour in contemplation of your sinful thoughts. This leads us to a quirky and fascinating aspect of medieval religious practice, the penitentials. These were detailed manuals created for confessors, essentially handbooks of sin that listed various transgressions and their corresponding, standardized penances. A priest could look up your specific sin, be it lustful thoughts, using a love charm, or even just looking at a woman with desire, and find the appropriate cure. For harboring your obsessive thoughts, you might be prescribed 3 days of fasting on bread and water. The system was designed to be a spiritual medicine, treating the sickness of sin with prescribed doses of penance. So where did all this romantic, chivalric energy go? The Church, in its wisdom, did provide a safe and pious outlet for it, the veneration of the Virgin Mary. A knight could declare himself to be the humble servant of Our Lady. He could wear her colors, fight in her honor, and dedicate his deeds to her. This Mariolatry channeled the entire structure of courtly love into a sanctioned, spiritual direction. The desire to serve a perfect, pure, and unattainable lady found its ultimate expression in the figure of the Queen of Heaven. This creates the great paradox of the age, a question that historians and theologians still debate. How could a society be so completely saturated with the literature and ideals of court romance, while simultaneously being governed by a religious institution that condemned its core principles? Were people simply holding two contradictory ideas in their heads at once, enjoying the sinful romance in stories while professing to follow the Church's teachings in their real lives? Was the Church's condemnation simply ignored in the private lives of the aristocracy? Or was the entire game of courtly love understood by everyone to be just that, a game? A fantasy with its own set of rules, completely separate from the real-world rules of morality and salvation? For you, this theological conflict is now a personal crisis. Everything the poets and troubadours have taught you to see as noble, your devotion, your artistic suffering, your unwavering service, is now being framed as a sinful distraction from your true purpose. Your lovesickness is no longer a romantic ailment. It is a spiritual failing. You leave the chapel with a heavy heart and a new set of instructions that contradict everything you have learned so far. The final and most difficult piece of medieval dating advice has been given: stop. Let go of your worldly attachment. Turn your face from your earthly beloved and redirect your heart towards God. It is a profound challenge, forcing you to ask whether the great passion that has consumed your every waking moment is a path to enlightenment or a path to damnation. You leave the chapel with the priest's stern words echoing in your ears. You try to follow his advice. You pray, you fast, you attempt to turn your thoughts from your earthly beloved to the heavens. But the human heart, you discover, is a stubborn and unruly thing. The image of your lady is still imprinted on your mind, and the ache of your lovesickness persists. You have followed every rule, from the medical to the poetic to the religious. And you realize, in a final, rebellious surge of feeling, that you cannot let this grand, agonizing journey end in a quiet, lonely retreat. After all this time, all this distance, you must risk everything for one single, secret, shared moment. You must arrange a meeting. This decision is a profound transgression. It is a conscious choice to defy the advice of your confessor, to wager your carefully guarded reputation, and to break the most fundamental rules of social conduct. It is the most dangerous, and most thrilling, move in the entire game. And you cannot do it alone. Your first step is to secure the help of a trusted go-between. This is perhaps the most delicate negotiation of all. You might approach one of the lady's personal maids, a woman whose loyalty could perhaps be bought with a few silver coins, or whose romantic heart might be swayed by your desperate, poetically. Or perhaps you turn once more to the troubadour, a man accustomed to the secrets of lovers. The conversation is a masterpiece of whispered suggestion and veiled requests. You are both keenly aware that you are plotting a conspiracy, and the consequences of being discovered would be disastrous for you both. Once your ally is secured, you must choose a location. It must be a place that is at once accessible but private, a place where a chance meeting could seem plausible if you were discovered. The classic setting, the one celebrated in all the great romances, is the hortus conclusus, the enclosed garden. The castle garden, with its high stone walls, its rows of fragrant herbs, its fruit trees, and its bubbling central fountain, is a small, man-made paradise. It is a symbol of purity and earthly delight, and its walls offer the promise of seclusion. The logistics are planned with the precision of a military campaign. The time will be dusk, during the lull after the evening meal, when the guards are changing shifts and the castle's inhabitants are occupied. The signal, a quirky but essential tidbit of this dangerous game, is agreed upon. If the lady is able to slip away unnoticed, she will place a single white lily on her windowsill, the very symbol of her purity, now used as a key to a clandestine meeting. This entire scenario, the secret meeting, the trusted go-between, the garden setting, is the climax of nearly every medieval romance, from Tristan and Isolde to Lancelot and Guinevere. This is a mainstream historical fact of the literary world they inhabited. While historians debate how often such risky meetings actually took place in real life, their constant presence in popular stories fueled the romantic imagination and presented this as the ultimate goal of a courtly lover. Was it a titillating fantasy enjoyed in books, or was it a reflection of real-life desires and actions? The answer remains lost to time. For you, however, it is about to become very real. You see it from across the courtyard. A single white flower, catching the last of the fading light. The signal has been given. Your heart pounds in your chest. You wait for what feels like an eternity, then slip out of your chamber, keeping to the shadows, your senses on high alert for any sound or movement. You make your way to the garden gate, which has been left unlatched. You slip inside. The air is cool and fragrant with the scent of roses and damp earth. It is quieter in here, the sounds of the castle muffled by the high walls. And then you see her. She is standing by the fountain, her face turned away from you, and for the first time since this all began, you are truly alone together. She turns as you approach. There are no words at first. The months of indirect communication, the letters, the songs, the shared glances, all culminate in this single, silent, overwhelming moment of proximity. Perhaps you dare to speak her real name for the first time, not her poetic sigil. Perhaps you take her hand, and the simple, shocking touch of her skin against yours is more powerful than any poem. The conversation is hushed, awkward, and brief. There is too much to say, and no time to say it. But in these few, stolen minutes, the artifice of courtly love falls away, replaced by a simple, terrifying, and beautiful human connection. But the risk hangs heavy in the air. Every rustle of leaves could be an approaching footstep. The meeting must end. You exchange a final, meaningful look, a look that is no longer dangerous, but now a shared secret, and you part, slipping away back into the shadows of the castle, your heart soaring with the thrill and terror of what you have just done. Your long, strange journey through the world of medieval dating advice has led you to this. To a single, perfect, and impossibly dangerous moment that was worth more than all the poetry and prestige in the world. Now, let the image of that secret garden fade at the edges. The scent of the roses grows faint, The sound of the fountain softens to a distant murmur. The story is over, its purpose served. The lovers and their risks, their rules and their romance, all begin to dissolve back into the soft, quiet mists of history. Their anxieties are not your anxieties. Their world of stone walls and strict rules is not your world. There is no need to worry about your reputation, or decipher a dream, or wait for a secret signal. Your only task now is to feel the comfort of your own bed, in the safety and quiet of your own room. Let go of the story, and allow your mind to become as still and peaceful as the castle garden after the lovers have departed. Let the gentle darkness behind your eyes be a welcome comfort. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to think about. It is simply time, now, to drift into your own, sweet, and untroubled dreams. Sweet dreams.
Dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh. Thì chớp nhán nhán được rồi. dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
Quay nó có đỏ đâu, không có đỏ. Nó xịn kìa, chứ nói này quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
Quay nó không có rõ đâu, không quay lại. Không có rõ. Má xịn kìa, chứ nói này quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. Dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
Quay
chớp chớp nhán nhán được rồi. dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
quay nó không có đỏ đâu, không quay nó không có đỏ. Nói xịn kìa chứ nói này quay đâu.
Thì chớp chớp nhán nhán